Ole Miss is in a great position to change college football forever.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, a former staff member at Ole Miss and a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports. Today on the show, we talk about Ole Miss had several decommitments this week, and we look at what that really means and if Ole Miss football fans should panic, and why Lane Kiffin has become the portal king out of necessity to build Ole Miss into the power that it is becoming. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers who make the show what it is. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. This has been an interesting week, especially in high school recruiting for Ole Miss. Ole Miss got decommitments from Jerome Miles, the wide receiver out of Utah, which I told everybody a couple of weeks back that once he got his fifth star on 247, that was going to bring a lot of company and a lot of urgency into this situation, that it was going to be difficult to hold him. It would have been nice to hold him, but it was going to be difficult. And the same thing, like Steve Wiltfong has put in a Fong bomb, silly stuff, about a Kylan Deere potentially flipping to Alabama. And then you have like Corey Amos and Dylan Alford decommitting as well, and which that's fine. All of that's fine. And everybody is just trying to figure out, should Ole Miss freak out about all of this going on? Now, in high school recruiting, let's just be real for a second. You would rather have them than not have them. But if you don't have them, it's not the end of the world. You have a situation that you recruit a player after they graduate high school. You can recruit a player after they graduate their freshman year, their sophomore year, their junior year, heck, even their senior year. So this is not what it was 5-6 years ago. Used to, whenever a player committed to a school, it was kind of it, because signing was kind of the finality, because if you transferred, it was about a year. But now that they can transfer every single year, a commitment at this point is a lot like a player saying that that school leads. And that works for Ole Miss and that works against Ole Miss on certain stuff. You've heard me talk over and over about Ole Miss and their pursuit of Deuce Knight, and they're going to chase him to the very end. But the same thing's happening on the reverse, to where highly recruited players are being recruited by everybody. And in this era of mercenaries in college football, it is always just like a whisker for anything happening. So you can't live or die in recruiting. And I understand that there is a whole business that has been created about these commitments and getting them as if a commitment is some sort of a finality. But you can't do that anymore. It doesn't work that way. And you can tell by what I've talked about over this thing. And if you're committed to another school, I don't care. I'm going to talk to you essentially the same way, talk about you that way. And also, I will say about Ole Miss, the same thing will happen about players that are committed to Ole Miss. You don't have players that are committed to Ole Miss because of love of the school. You don't have players that are committed to Notre Dame because of loves of the school anymore. You just don't. This is the era of mercenaries in college football. And because of that, you can't live or die in high school recruiting. And Lane Kiffin has built an Ole Miss dynasty almost that is happening. They had 10 wins in 2021, 11 wins in 2023. They're going for the third 10-win season in 4 years. And honestly, the fourth year, when 2022, they'd have got it as well if Lane Kiffin wouldn't have played that dance with Auburn. But I digress on that situation. You have a situation that Lane Kiffin has accidentally, and I do think it was accidentally, ran into multi-year recruiting out of the transfer portal. I think when Ole Miss landed Jaxson Dart in 2022, in that February, that changed Ole Miss's program forever, because Jaxson Dart, he's getting ready to start his third year in Ole Miss's program. There's players that compete as true freshmen that go through that do not play 3 years at a school. Jaxson Dart is getting ready for his third year in a Lane Kiffin offense. You look at these skill players on Ole Miss's roster. It's absolutely ridiculous. These are the transfers that have come in since 2022. You have Jaxson Dart, like I said. He's getting ready for his third year starting at quarterback. You have Tre Harris getting ready for his second year starting at wide receiver. He might be the best wide receiver in the country. Watch yesterday's podcast if you have any questions about that. Ole Miss got a transfer from Antoine Juice Wells, which that should be pretty fantastic. I saw PFF did an article on him comparing him to Des Bryant. With that kind of got me excited a little bit. You got Jordan Watkins, who was a third-year transfer himself. He came with Jaxson Dart in 2022, but he's a transfer from Louisville. You have Caden Prieskorn, who's in his second-year transfer from Memphis. You have Daquan Wright, who just transferred in from Virginia Tech. Over on the defensive side of the ball, you have Chris Hardy, who came up from Jacksonville State. This was a spring signing. You have Rashad Amos, a running back out of Miami of Ohio that was committed to Mississippi State and then Colorado, ended up at Ole Miss. You have Dominique Thomas, who is, I think he's a walk-on, but he's a transfer from Clemson as well. You have Ulysses Bentley IV, who is, again, a third-year transfer out of Southern Methodist. You have Henry Parrish Jr., who is on his second transfer and back to Ole Miss. He started at Ole Miss. He has since come back to Ole Miss. You have Logan Diggs. And like I said, I can go on this way a while. Logan Diggs, transfer from LSU. He probably will not play this year because of an ACL tear, but he's a good running back, and he's likely the starting running back for 2025 already. You have Princely Umanmielen, potential first-round draft pick, transfer from Florida. You have Walter Nolen, potential first-round draft pick, transfer from Texas A&M. You can see all of this. There's other transfers as well. These are just the ones that I have listed in my graphic queue. Good players, but Lane Kiffin accidentally stumbled in 2 years ago whenever he got Jared Ivey. That's another transfer from Georgia Tech to go with Jordan Watkins and Jaxson Dart. Those guys came in, and they've established a little bit of a hierarchy of a way to build through the transfer portal. Now, Ole Miss has supplemented their transfer portal classes with high school recruiting very well. And that makes people nervous, especially the recruiting services that make money off of high school recruiting. There's a whole economy that has popped up around high school recruiting. So anytime that you go against it, there's going to be pushback. It's no different than Bill Snyder whenever he was recruiting JUCOs back in the day. It's like, you can't do that. Well, this year is the case study of whether or not that can happen for Lane Kiffin. If Lane Kiffin can get to the playoff, host a playoff game, maybe win a playoff game, you can see that you can build a playoff level championship caliber roster through the transfer portal. Now, the question of staying power, I do not know. I do not know how this will look, but they have done a decent job of getting underclassmen again underneath, like the Jaxson Dart. They added a Walker Howard and an Austin Simmons to make their position rooms even better. They have supplemented. They've done actually very well in high school recruiting, despite the Jerome Miles and the Corey Amos and the Dylan Alfreds decommitting and possibly a Kylan Deere. They've done pretty well in high school recruiting, but it is as a supplement to these transfer portal. People need to understand. They need to get this fact more than anything. Ole Miss does the transfer portal out of necessity. If they try to do things like the big, rich, wealthy schools through high school, they're going to struggle because there's just going to go up against some schools that you don't have as much money than. You need a short, tight window, and the transfer portal offers that short, tight window in most situations, especially in the winter. Before all of these schools can accumulate, you have a chance to get your offer, get them in school, and get them going. And that has happened with Princely Umanmielen, Walter Nolen, Chris Hardy, Juice Wells. All of this talent that Ole Miss accumulated in the winter was because of this short window, and they do a very good job of being extremely organized and knowing who exactly they're going to go after. It's really interesting stuff if you think about it. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen of the day. This year's proof of concept for Lane Kiffin of whether or not the portal can be used for multi-year builds. This is the year. This is the contract year for the transfer portal. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. They have views from every seat in the venue. They have the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, all the customer service bells and whistles that you can want, they have. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all of that screaming and shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you each and every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all of that screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, news, opinions, and streaming all 24/7 on your YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. July 2nd, less than a week away at 7 p.m. Central Time, you can join us at Walk-Ons in Ridgeland, Mississippi for a meet and greet. It has been confirmed. We'll have Justin from Stewart's Cajun Dill Pickles. We have Scott from the College Corner that has some swag. We're still working on all of that good stuff. Should be really fun, but I can't wait to see all of you there then. And also, there's still time to join the Grove Collective and help Ole Miss football be elite. You can go to thegrovecollective.com and join today. So, like I said, this is the proof of concept year for Lane Kiffin. This is the year that matters more than just about any other in terms of whether or not this transfer portal window business can actually work. And it looks like it's going to work. You've got all the predictions of that it's going to work. So now all it does is need to work. It doesn't need to be a year where something bad happens and you end up like Jaxson Dart goes down and they don't make the playoff. Then people will blame the transfer portal for that situation. But this is the year where everything can change in college football. If Ole Miss makes it to the playoff and hosts a playoff game, let's say Ole Miss hosts Michigan in Vaughn Hemingway Stadium in mid-December, and Ole Miss wins that game and gets to whatever bowl game they're going to, whether the Sugar, the Peach, or however they have it set up. At that point, everybody is going to start recruiting this way. High school recruiting becomes a supplemental piece as opposed to the main piece of building your roster. Right now, everybody's saying you can't do it because there is no proof of concept. There's some really good teams, but right now there's teams like Colorado that kind of gives you a bad name on what's going on. It's so Jekyll and Hyde, so up and down. So can Ole Miss, through this transfer portal strategy, string together 3 10-win seasons after not having any 3 10-win seasons in 4 years? That is what is at stake for Ole Miss. And when you look at this playoff and what can happen, and Ole Miss recruiting through the transfer portal, they do a fantastic job of recruiting in the transfer portal. There are people in that office right now watching college level film of knowing who all is exactly out there and people that you want to keep an eye on in case they get into the portal in December. All of that and knowing exactly what's going on, Ole Miss has a nice system for identifying talent in a quick window. That quick window, the organization of the Grove Collective, how good Walker Jones and that collective is, Lane Kiffin being an early adopter, is the way that Ole Miss is able to move so fast after prospects in the transfer portal. Ole Miss can do this better than anybody else. There are certain places like Colorado where they get some transfers from time to time because their coach is really famous. They haven't done anything on the field that justifies it, but their coach is really famous. They get the clicks. They are the football version of whatever Caitlin Clark is. And you get that famous for being famous type stuff. So that's the transfer portal, and that is where the reputation of the transfer portal is kind of coming from. But Lane Kiffin has built something at Ole Miss that's honestly special, and something that is so tight-knit and so well run. I don't know that many times that Ole Miss has had something similar to like this since Wobble Davidson was running around in the 60s. This team is together and they have tight leadership. Now, going forward, I do think the transfer portal, and I've said this over and over again, people are going to say the transfer portal is going to stop. It's not going to stop. It's a necessity that Ole Miss hits this hard and hard every single year. There's no way to get around that. But there are some things that I think Ole Miss is going to have to do, okay? One, if you're looking for a quarterback in the transfer portal to come in just straight on campus and be the quarterback and be the leader of the team, that team is going to struggle. See 2022 with Jaxson Dart arriving at the end of the year where it kind of fell apart. But once that quarterback is established and you can build up with a core, you just like if you recruit that core out of high school, just like that, they become a strong leader of the team. And the 2023 Ole Miss football team was just the opposite of the 2022 football team in leadership. That was a player-led organization to the point where if you did things that were against the team, if you did, like whenever I was at Ole Miss, Ed Orgeron, rule number one was protect the team. Protect the team. That was his rule. At Ole Miss, it's pro mindset now. That's become the new protect the team, pro mindset. The pro mindset at Ole Miss is we don't stand for anything that can lower us down from where we want to be. Whatever the standard is, we do not stand for you not meeting it. You saw in that Peach Bowl, Quinshon Judkins, to where they just wouldn't help him up. And he was like yelling at Jaxson Dart. And Jaxson Dart actually had to come over and say, take him out of the game. That happened in the Peach Bowl in a game that Ole Miss was blowing Penn State out of the water. The leadership on that team dealt with it. So anybody that's worried about culture, do not worry about the 2024 culture. As long as Jaxson Dart and J.J. Pegues and Jordan Watkins and those guys, Jared Ivey, are running around, that leadership this year, I'm not worried about the 2024 culture. 2025 and beyond, maybe. But we'll have to see starting in the transfer portal window of January what 2025 will be. We have no idea. And anybody that has any idea whatsoever, they're lying to you. But if you look at Ole Miss's roster right now, somewhere around 20 to 18, 19, somewhere starters on Ole Miss's offense and defense were transfers. At some point in time in the last 3 years, they transferred to Ole Miss. You have Trey Washington, who was recruited. You have like Jeremy James, who was recruited. Micah Pettis was recruited. But that was about it. I mean, I guess you can count Henry Parrish maybe, because he was originally recruited, even though he transferred out and back. But the point is, this team is entirely built on the transfer portal. There's no way to get around it. This is the case study. This is the team that can completely change college football, because if Ole Miss is successful, other teams will copy this. And specifically teams like Oklahoma State, Mississippi State, Kentucky, Arkansas, the teams that were right below that top tier. The top tier teams, they were all kind of doing their own thing, the one percenters, you might say. The teams that were right below that, they could go up and get in there for 1 year and they'd come back down. The yo-yo teams, they are going to use the transfer portal as a primary and not a supplemental thing. So this is, if Ole Miss is successful this year, it is going to get more difficult in the transfer portal for Ole Miss. As it becomes the primary and as everybody is paying attention to that, it's going to get more difficult. Like I said, Ole Miss being an early adopter in this is a massive, massive thing. And I hope everybody is enjoying what is going on. But if you want to change college football ever, and this is like making high school recruiting at the very bottom of the list of players that you recruit. Very bottom. Right now, they're everything. They have a whole ecosystem within all these pay sites of what these high school players are doing, even though if you look at Ole Miss's roster, there's 2 or 3 of them that even play. The transfer portal at Ole Miss is massively important. And if Ole Miss is successful and can build this team, football could change forever around college. In this era of mercenaries, it's going to get weird. Everybody has to learn how to follow in different ways. I'm not telling you how to look at it. I'm telling you how I see it. If you want to go up and down and ride the roller coaster of recruiting in June, have at it. That's your right. You can do that. Some people are happy whenever anxiety is all filled in their life. But know that Ole Miss specifically, while they're trying to elephant hunt in high school recruiting, and that's the Kylan Deers, the Caleb Cunninghams, the Deuce Knights, those guys, this team is going to be consistently built in the transfer portal. Why? Because Ole Miss is good at building through the transfer portal. You have records, you have everything. All you need, the proof of concept of Ole Miss getting into the playoff. And if that happens, everything is going to change. Should be interesting to see. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen. Now that the roster is set, we will give you our September W's and L's this season. We're going to start that this week. It's a surprise of how the Ole Miss Rebels are going to do. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available in the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Be part of history. All right, so we have finally hit the point where W's and L's can happen. And we do W's and L's around this time every year, to where I give you my W's as in wins, L's as in losses for Ole Miss's football schedule this year. And we're going to start with September and include the August game. And we're doing a third segment thing because those first 5 games are honestly not very good. So you can't really lead a podcast to that. But we wanted to start these as well. And then we'll start with South Carolina tomorrow as well. So here we go, W's and L's, whenever you look at it. For the 2024 Ole Miss Rebels, August 31st at Furman. I think that's a W. The biggest thing in that game, in my opinion, is probably the uniforms that Ole Miss are going to wear. If Ole Miss drops that game against Furman, that means disaster. That means, burn everything down. So I think the number one question in that game will be the uniform that Ole Miss chooses to wear. And I think it might be a stormtrooper wear all white type thing. The New Jersey with the powder blue Ole Miss may come out in there. The fans are going to be in white, the whole 9 yards. I think that's the biggest question of that game. Competition gets a little bit harder against MTSU a week later. I think Ole Miss is going to win that as well. Lane Kiffin just tweeted, by the way, as I'm recording this, to the portal. See you on the flip side, to whoever decommits. So that's kind of funny because he is the portal king. It just is what it is. I think MTSU is going to be a little bit sterner competition for Ole Miss, but this is not a situation to where I'm necessarily worried about this. Derek Mason in year one, if everybody remembers what Derek Mason in year one was at Vanderbilt, it was not good. By the end, Derek Mason got formidable on the defensive side of the ball because he's a really good defensive mind, but in the beginning, it was difficult at best. Now, September 14th is the first, quote, tricky game. I don't think it is. Wake Forest was not very good a year ago. The game is at Wake. It's going to be on the CW. It's a game that Ole Miss should win by probably 14 to 20 points. but it'd be the first test for Ole Miss against higher Power 4 competition. September 21st against Georgia Southern. That's another situation like Clay Helton is running the air raid at Georgia Southern. They do have really terrific uniforms. I encourage everybody that doesn't know what Georgia Southern's uniforms look like. They're like Alabama, but even maybe even more plain, and it's navy and white. It's like a cross between Bama and Penn State. It looks really good, the Georgia Southern Eagles. Ole Miss should win that game. If Ole Miss loses any of the first four, the playoffs are out of the question, okay? Any of the first four, the playoffs are out of the question. I think Ole Miss wins all of those games. Now, the last game in September is the first Southeastern Conference game against Kentucky. I have that as a W as well. Now, Kentucky is a team that does not beat themselves. I talked about this on Friday. They do not beat themselves. And because of that, you need to go out and win the game. They're going to force you to beat them. Now, I think Ole Miss has the talent to absolutely do it, but we will see exactly what happens with Kentucky. Love Barian Brown as a wide receiver. Now, the quarterback, like Brock Vandegrift, really good player as well, but need to see how he is going to look when the lights cut on. He's a transfer portal addition, and we always talked about first-year transfer portal, there could be leadership type situations. So we will see exactly how it goes. But I think Ole Miss is going to start off the year through September 5-0, and we'll see exactly what that looks moving forward. Tomorrow we will do October. I think that's 3 games. And then Friday we will do November. And then we'll talk about what the season could look like for Ole Miss if the W's and L's go the way that I think it's going to go. Should be really interesting to see. So 5-0, pretty fired up about that. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We have the most perspectives around Ole Miss sports, and it's one of the many reasons why we are the number one Ole Miss podcast out there, and thank you for that. But for your second listen, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. And for those of you on YouTube, we will send you there right now. Howdy toddy, everyone.